Dragon's Dogma 2 is gaming's latest controversial release. From a wildly unoptimized PC release to being filled with gaming's most notorious DRM, alongside releasing as a single-player $70 game, a bevy of microtransactions, the game has seemingly split the player base and spectators alike into two camps. Those okay with it, and those who aren't. And I will not mince words or sugarcoat my opinions on Dragon's Dogma 2. It is the culmination of a near decade-long campaign by the video games industry at large to normalize disgusting business practices to slowly allow this infection of avarice to fester and thrive. What was once a practice that sprung about as a form of monetization for free-to-play games has unraveled and now fully ingratiated itself among full-priced game releases in a quite insidious manner even on day one. There are even people who will readily defend such business practices or preach about their indifference as to grandstand everyone who can see the forest for what it is and not just the few trees. And I didn't even connect the dots fully myself. And it wasn't until I heard the opinions of Preach Gaming that the true reality began to fully set in for me. These practices of Dragon's Dogma 2 do not exist in singular vacuums, removed from one another. In fact, these festering wounds are fully connected in my opinion. Stop and ask, why would a single-player game require DRM, namely de novo anti-tamper? It's a single-player game. What concern is it of Capcom or fellow players if I choose, of my own volition, or even you, to modify or tamper with my copy of the game? Maybe it's not a way that you or even I would want to partake of Dragon's Dogma 2, but maybe it is for others, and what right would I have to tell them no? Well, I believe it makes far more sense when you look at the microtransactions. Why would you want people to be able to fully modify the game if you're trying to sell them accoutrements that, while they can be found in-game, require some level of effort to obtain? What sense would there be if you're trying to sell these items in allowing the player to simply code in these items for themselves? Now, it is my understanding that people can still do this, mainly with the character editor item. So one of two possibilities open themselves up here. Either this wasn't the express purpose of the anti-tamper, and perhaps it is more so related to the shareable pawn system, and I imagine that's part of the calculus regardless. Or someone who was in charge of this messed up. It's either indifference or incompetence, and considering the quality of the game otherwise, mainly in terms of poor performance, sadly I fear it's the latter. Once starting as absurd horse armor, microtransactions in games have taken root in nearly every genre inside of gaming. From mobile to console to PC gaming, this disease has spread its pustules and filth, compromising game design in varying ways, and to varying effects. Now, it is important to note, not every game needs to be ruined in its totality by microtransactions. And to my knowledge, Dragon's Dogma 2's suite of microtransactions are, in the generalist of senses, mostly benign, and that the rate of acquisition in the game is not overly compromised as some pessimistic spin to incentivize the average player to partake of the metaphorical poisoned apple. And Dragon's Dogma 2 specifically suffers from other aspects in its design and optimization that have impacted my enjoyment far more than simply this online storefront that is also advertised on the main screen when you load up the game each time. While not having the ability to create a new character, I digress. The performance of the game is laughable, and while my machine hovers in the most generous of terms on the minimum requirements, many others, with far more capable and modern machines, are seeing similar performance issues to mine that make the experience lackluster and disappointing. The sting of these microtransactions would, in my opinion, be far less if the game ran somewhat competently to begin with, but the seeming priority to bolster and strengthen and defend the microtransaction store, while the quality of the actual experience is invariably compromised for many consumers, is, in my humble opinion, a gross slap in the face. And I find it quite upsetting that many out there gleefully defend these business practices, taking on a facade that most resembles some kind of spin-up corporate puppet. barking out copy-paste rhetoric in defense of business practices that do not exist for the benefit of the consumer's experience, but to exsanguinate as much money from the community as reasonably possible. Capcom has done this before, and people view this notion as almost a sigh of relief. Oh, they've done this before, so it must be fine. People didn't kick up a stink then. Well, where's the logic? What sense is there that simply because it happened before, then it's automatically okay? Where's the singular step back required to admit that Capcom can make a fantastic game, but inject it with completely needless filth? If they didn't believe they would make money on it, they wouldn't have bothered to code or implement it. If they aren't that hard to obtain, why do I even need to buy the ability to change how my character looks if I desire so? Why not just make it free, in-game? Why not make it readily available? Why add the friction where none needs to exist? And that goes for every microtransaction here. When these mechanisms are allowed to spin on without end due to either negligence, silence, or indifference, then it bolsters the idea that these practices will not lead to enough pushback or frighten off others from attempting the same, inevitably leading companies to attempt more egregious practices to see how far they can shove the needle deeper into our flesh. How many rank pustules can be allowed to propagate until the membrane rips open and community goodwill splatters like pus on the proverbial floor? And I've seen a sentence be passed around quite a bit, so to round out this video, I'll leave you with this. You get what you tolerate. And it sucks, cause Dragon's Dogma 2 looks like a fantastic game, truly. And performance issues that forced me to drop the game aside, I want to return after a substantial PC upgrade, and hopefully a few patches to the world of Dragon's Dogma 2 and partake in how great the game seemingly is beneath these issues. But these issues should be dragged out into the light and not simply ignored. They should be discussed and critiqued. I think you can perfectly enjoy a game, if not have an amazing time with a game, while being able to critique these components and not feel the need to come to the defense for whatever odd reason. Apathy is death. If you know the reference, leave in the comments. The game is a full-priced, single-player game. Microtransactions should not be part of that calculus at all, irregardless of how banal they are or how insignificant. The game is $70. If this practice is normalized, where does gaming go from here? How much worse can and will it get before enough pushback happens? Where's the line in the sand? Or does it have to keep eroding away with the wind and redrawn further down the beach? It's a sad state of affairs, but again, you get what you tolerate. See you later, everybody.